Welcome everybody to this session. My name is Chris Kepler, University of Akron. I'm IT Content Director on the board of CBI. I use he, him, his. And a couple of reminders. I know some of you have heard these things before, but we want to make sure that everybody understands this session is being recorded. The town hall area of Attentify is open. There's a CBI member in every session. So if there's something we can help you with, help to troubleshoot, we're here to help. And you can certainly message us outside of here as well. Make sure that you tune in for the National Student Production Awards tonight, 7 o'clock Eastern. And please, please don't forget to rate your sessions. It's really, really important to us. We do take a lot of time as a board after the convention is over through a lot of things, including a lot of data. And that data is actually generated by you. The app, not on this website, but on the Attentify app to actually rate the session. And we do take a look at those ratings. It helps us make some decisions for the following year, okay? Also keep the conversation going. You can join the CBI email listserv, go to askcbi.org, click on resources, and then you can click on email listserv and join that. We have a lot of great discussions that go on throughout the year. I know I found it very helpful. I've got some great ideas from some of the other CBI members. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Glenn and to Laura. Take it away.
Laura, ladies first.
Well, I guess I should introduce myself. I'm Laura Hafley. I'm a reporter with CBS in Sacramento. I started off working in New York City. I'm from that area. Worked at a number of news stations there, New York 1, News 12, and then finally with 1010 Wins with Glenn before I eventually came out to California. I guess we're talking about breaking news in the age of coronavirus, right? It's been a wild few months for all of us, particularly for journalists. Certainly in California, we've been dealing with a number of things from the pandemic to wildfires, and of course, this current civil rights movement. The interesting thing about where I work is that we were hit with the first wave of coronavirus patients. If you remember, they came in on a cruise ship and they were docked in the port of Oakland. And those cruise ship passengers were immediately transferred to Travis Air Force Base, which is the Air Force Base in our coverage area. And they were held there for I believe, a couple of weeks. So we really got the first initial taste of what it was going to be like to be close to people who had this virus, which we still don't know much about, right? But at the time, we knew next to nothing about. So it was scary. It was like, if you've ever seen E.T., it was like the scene where E.T. and Elliot are inside and all the hazmat suit guys are around them. That's what it felt like. And I'm sure it was much scarier for the actual patients and passengers themselves. But, we watched the buses pull into Travis Air Force Base, and there were local news organizations there. CNN was there, and it was an incredible moment for a number of reasons, but I think the biggest reason is that it all became real. Up until that point, I think we were all sort of like, just wash your hands, it'll be fine, it's not going to get that bad here. And then when we saw those buses packed with people in PPE for the first time, now it's sort of, we're used to seeing those images, but we saw it for the first time that day, and it was scary, and everything just took off from there. So I'll keep this short. I went to Syracuse University, kind of an East Coast girl, and came out to California to explore and try something new. And a week and a half into being here and a week and a half into a new newsroom, coronavirus hit and we got kicked out of our newsroom. So I got to meet almost nobody and had to source a new state and a new area without being able to meet people face to face and without being able to be in groups. So it was difficult, but it's been a lot of fun. I'm really glad to be here with all of you. This is probably the most people I've spoken to at once since February, and I appreciate you guys having me.
Peter, you want to go? It's saying my internet connection's unstable. I may just reconnect. I don't know if Pete, if you want to go, if you can hear it.
Hey, Pete, unmute yourself. These radio guys.
Yes, I'm unmuted. I apologize. I apologize for being late. What do you want me to talk about?
Well, just introduce yourself, Pete. I guess a little bit about, you and I have a similar kind of story here, but yours is, different in many ways as well. Just a little bit about, about what you do for WCBS and how it's been doing it during the pandemic, and some of the, just a little bit about your background and who you are.
Sure. So I'm a reporter at WCBS Radio. I've been here for 26 years. I went to Syracuse, graduated, went to a very small radio station, then went to a slightly larger radio station, and then ended up here at WCBS. I'm a general assignment reporter. Every day is different, which is great. It is the best job in the world. In terms of COVID, you've got to be creative. And, one thing I'll stress as someone who's been doing this for a long time is you want to be safe. You don't want to be a hero. And I think wearing a mask, having people you speak to wear a mask, unlike TV with radio, we can do phone interviews. And so in April and a good part of May, that was probably all I did was phone interviews. And I really distinctly remember the stories I did right before the lockdown, talking to people on the street, wearing masks, going to Governor Cuomo news conferences. Well, they built a hospital at the Javits Center. So I think you've got to be creative, but you also want to be smart. You don't want to be the one doing the story from a hospital bed. At least I don't want to be the one. And I think you don't want to be the one either, because you just don't know what happens.
Thanks, Pete. I'm Glenn Schuck. I think the first thing I want to say is that I'm proud of my association with CBI. I think this is my 10th conference. I've had the opportunity to be a keynote speaker, be on many panels, and it's a great organization. And those of you who are just kind of getting the first feel for it, I highly encourage you to stay involved in it. There's great networking here, great people, great board, great leadership, and you'll get a lot out of it. And I just wanted to say that as well. I work at 1010 Wins in New York City, All News Radio. Pete and I actually work for the same company, Entercom. We're in the same building, in fact. He and I do very similar jobs. I'm a reporter. I work morning drive, 4 a.m. till noon. Sometimes in the studio, like this week, I've been in at the election desk talking about elections every morning. So I do anchor on occasion. Like Pete was saying, it's certainly been a time like no other. I keep mentioning Peter Haskell because not only we're friends, and Laura and I are friends as well, but Pete and I have a long-term friendship and a long-term connection through September 11th as well. A lot of Pete can talk about that later, just in terms of what we covered on 9/11 and the events after, even to this day, the relationships that he especially has built, and I have as well, on that story. And I think, Pete, you can agree or disagree. I think we both thought that when we went through 9/11, it was probably the biggest story we would ever cover, and the aftermath of it. Not ever seeing something like this coming. I think we were prepared in many ways, because I like to think we're, New York, we were kind of prepared for anything, but it's been difficult. As Peter says, we're worrying about our own safety. Laura touched on it. It's not just COVID. There's been rioting and protests and civil unrest, and unfortunately, a lot going on, which has led to some property destruction and injuries and things like that. It's been an extremely difficult time. But, our job in news, and we can talk about it later a little bit, is, in terms of objectivity and getting the news out. And there's so many things going on, and so politics plays into it. As Pete says, we have to be safe. I really have never stopped being in the field reporting. I continue to do it with extreme care, mass social distancing, very careful in our interviews that we do on the street. If I can avoid that at all, I will. But as Peter will tell you, it's hard to do that. So you know, I'm sure you have all gone through this too. There's fatigue, there's COVID fatigue, there's fatigue just from the story in general. We worry about our families and our friends and all that. So just to echo what Peter and Laura have been saying too, it's been difficult. I think the media has done a really good job. You know, politics aside, it's been a very challenging year for everybody. And we look forward to taking your questions and thoughts. I don't know, Peter, if you want to just weigh in a couple seconds too about in terms of, you know, what we went through on 9/11 and kind of what's led us here to this. It's been a lot. So.
Yeah, I mean, Clint and I had a lot of other people that we know covered 9/11 and the aftermath, the days and weeks that followed, and we didn't have masks. I didn't have a mask, and Clint and I both know people who have been sickened with 9/11 related illnesses, and we've both done a ton of these stories. And I think that's why I stress, having been through that, I want to be safe. You know, looking back now, I should have worn a mask then. And I was around the perimeter of the site every day, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week for a month. And then I was still there every day, 5 days a week, 8 hours a day beyond that. So I should have worn a mask then. I'm going to make sure I'm taking care of myself now. I'm going to, you know, it's funny. I covered, I went to Haiti after the earthquake in I don't know what year it was. And they had all these buildings that collapsed and pancaked, and they had pulverized concrete. And so when I went there, I was telling the people that I ran across that one thing we learned from the World Trade Center is pulverized concrete gets in your lungs and it's bad. And so I wore a mask. And so based on that experience, I would say be smart and protect yourself.
I don't know, Chris, are you there? I don't know if you want to ask questions, or if Laura, you want to talk a little about, you know, you've had, you know, I've been watching your videos with this, you know, in the middle of a pandemic covering raging wildfires around you. It's talk about challenging. I mean, talk about some of the challenges. You know, you know, you certainly have done a great job with it. And how have you done it, basically? I mean, how have you gotten through it?
Yeah, obviously coming out to Northern California, I knew covering wildfires would be a big part of what I'd be doing. This wildfire season has been particularly bad, and I thought that I was the only one who thought that. And then all the CAL FIRE chiefs started saying it. All of the other reporters who've been here for 10, 20 years started saying it. The Paradise Fire a couple of years ago was awful, and this year in terms of acreage has been significantly worse. So it's been, and Peter said something interesting. You do have to get creative. You know, there's a way to balance being safe and also getting the story and getting the story to your audience. The way we cover wildfires is, you know, obviously I'm with my photographer. In California, there's a penal code that allows journalists to be wherever the firefighters are. There is no caution tape in California when it comes to that. So we find ourselves right on the fire line, inches away from, you know, walls of fire. And that sounds like an exaggeration, but it's really not. These fires are really bad and they move really quickly. So one of the things that our station was able to do for us, and I'm sure they do it every year, is set up a meeting with CAL FIRE chiefs before fire season really gets going. And they give us some tips on how to stay safe, whether it's, you know, spotting fires while your photographer is getting video, what type of equipment you need to have, what type of boots you need to have on you, having an N95 mask, but our station has taken it a step further and we've all gotten fitted for respirators. So I guess part of what works out is that in the middle of the pandemic, you have to be wearing masks. When you're covering fires, you're wearing masks anyway, right? So that kind of works out. But it's been scary, it's been hard, but you know, the most important thing is when it comes to wildfires is to listen to the firefighters. If they tell you you need to run, you have to run. If they tell you to get in your car and leave, you leave. You know, of course we want to get the story. Of course you want to get that money shot. Of course you want to show your audience what they need to be prepared for, when they need to leave, you know, but at some point, you know, safety has to come first. I am a firm believer in that, that journalists are able to go behind the front, go into the front lines and go into places that nobody else is able to get to. And that is a good thing, because then we are able to communicate with our audience and help to keep them safe. But you know instinctively when it's at the point where you too have to leave. So listening to the first responders, listening to the police officers, the firefighters who know what they're doing and they'll let you stay as long as possible, but when they tell you to go, you have to go. In terms of covering wildfires during the pandemic, it's just another layer that we're all thinking about. I don't think journalists who are covering wildfires are the only ones thinking about it. We all are. Going to the grocery store, going to school, going to cover a feature story, whatever you're doing, we now all as a society have this extra layer of don't forget your mask, make sure you're bringing hand sanitizer, stay 6 feet apart. And people tend to be responsible is what I've noticed. And, you know, even the firefighters who are dealing with so much, they keep a distance from you when they're talking to you, and they wear a mask if you want them to wear a mask. And you just have to be a little extra conscious about how to stay safe. But the wildfires have been incredible, and there's so much to unfold and to dig into when it comes to those fires. A couple interesting things that I've learned are the amount of people that help put these fires out, from the actual CAL FIRE firefighters to the US Forest Service to hand crews made up of inmates in California who actually now for the first time are allowed to pursue jobs as firefighters once they serve their time. That was not able to happen before. So it's a team effort truly, and these firefighters are relying on the journalists as well. And that is, I think we're all in this business, and Glenn and Peter, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we all do this to help people. Yep. It's our way of doing our part and giving back and helping. I always say if I didn't do this, I'd probably be some kind of first responder. And the firefighters rely on you to tell people where the fire is, where the evacuations are happening, and who needs to leave and when. So it's an important job. It's a dangerous job. And I couldn't imagine doing anything else.
I know Chris mentioned here too, if you do have a question and you want to type it into chat, you can do that because we'll get to it eventually. I'll circle back to myself, but I did want to say, you know, congratulations to those of you who are college broadcasters. It's been a challenge for you, obviously, as well. Getting to campus or not being on campus, or still, you know, using social media and doing the great work you're doing in your broadcasting platform. So kudos to you all to, you know, you're living through an incredible time and you're all really stepping up and being a part again of CBI. Pete, can I ask you, let's go back to Pete Haskell. Again, if you just come in, Pete's from WCBS 880 in New York City. It's hard to ask this, Pete, but is there one story that kind of stuck with you these last couple of months in terms of maybe somebody you met or a newsmaker? You've told so many great stories during the pandemic in terms of something that really has just stuck with you when you go home at night and say, you know, I think I'm going to remember this for a long time.
I think, like a lot of things, it's people who step up to help, people who go out of their way. There was, you know, there's one story. There's a woman whose sister is an emergency room nurse at one of the city hospitals, and her fiance started donating meals, and it just grew into this massive thing where instead of one shift at one hospital, they were providing meals at a lot of hospitals and really making a difference. The other one that sticks out is one in my neighborhood. I live on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and there's a Broadway actor who's a star by the name of Brian Stokes Mitchell, who was in Man of La Mancha, and he played the lead character. And he, for like a month, was leaning outside his apartment window and singing The Impossible Dream. So you might think to yourself, what's the big deal? But in New York, every night at 7 o'clock for months, we had what was the clap out. And people would just clap their hands, bang pots and pans as a thank you to healthcare workers. This guy is this amazing singer. He had COVID. He was leaning out his window and he would draw like hundreds of people a night. And it just, there was power in his art and in the sense of community that everybody was dealing with the same thing. Everybody was frustrated and aggravated and scared. And he used his art and his performance to bring people together. And it's a story that made national news. I mean, I know most of the TV networks did it. And it just, you tell that story, I spoke to him, and it's just power in a single story. One person's effort, buying a meal, singing, doing what they could, just helps bring people together. They realize that there are good people out there. They're not alone. They're in it with other people. And I think there's power in those stories.
Absolutely, Pete. Laura, we're going to go to you in a second because Orbit TV had a question here. It's Dr. Marshall's team and the folks at Muskingum. Hello out to Muskingum and everybody out there. What is the story that we've covered that moved you? And Peter talked about it. And mine is similar. I'll make it real quick, and then Laura will throw it to you. There's a real food crisis in the New York City area. And, you hear food crisis and you say, obviously, there's always somebody that needs some help with food and it's terrible. This is an overwhelming, disastrous problem here. And I'm sure there are other places in the country, Peter has seen it too, where you go to food pantries here, and there's one in the Meadowlands in New Jersey, a couple miles from New York City that I've covered a lot. And you go they do it every Tuesday, and you get there at 6 a.m. People have been lined up all night to wait till 11 o'clock to get a box of $40 worth of food. And you unfortunately have the cynics online saying, well, they're in line to steal a box of food. I don't think anybody's going to wait in line 8 hours for a box of food. I mean, there's a real food crisis here. People who've never gone through this, have never been unemployed, have never lost their job to this extent before. And just kind of along the line what Pete was saying, I was at that event one day and a very brand new BMW pulled up in the line. And there was a mother and a gentleman, I'm assuming it was her significant other, and a child in the back with a sign that she wrote in crayon saying, "Thank you for the food." I mean, you can imagine how heart-wrenching that is. The little girl rolled down the window, even though they told her not to because of COVID, to say thank you for the food. So it's a difficult time. A lot of families are going through it. I'll talk about that. We'll go to Laura next.
I think the most memorable stories, I would say, do have to do with the wildfires. The LNU complex fire is one of the most destructive fires in the history of California. And I had the privilege of being able to, all of these people are losing their homes, losing their photo albums, losing all of their clothes, everything they own, in the middle of a pandemic, when places like the Salvation Army are not open. All these people are losing their homes, and when you get evacuated, there's no telling when you're going to be able to go back. You might not be able to go back to your home for days, for weeks, and in some cases longer than that. And as I said before, journalists are allowed to go into the evacuation zone. They're not allowed to stop us. We can go wherever we want. And I had several people who lost their homes reach out to me and email me asking if I would be able to go and check on their house to see if it was still standing, because they weren't going to be able to. And obviously that's a tough email to get for a number of reasons. Number one, you have to do your job first. Your job is not necessarily to go and check on people's homes. But I was able to, there were 2 families that I was able to go and check on their homes for them. And there was nothing left. We pulled into the evacuation zone. I plugged in their address into my GPS. We got there and we pulled into the driveway and everything was gone. Now it's my job to call and tell them that. And that is painful for a number of reasons. I don't want to see anybody be hurt or be sad or be in trouble. And there's another layer of pain because you just don't know how they're going to deal with it in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic. So I spoke to 2 families on separate occasions and told them as gently as possible that their home was gone and that I was so sorry and that I wish I could give them a hug. And, of course, they asked us to go and look at their house and go and check on their house for them, or else we would not have done that. And it taught me a lot as a person, and it taught me a lot as a journalist. I mean, the first thing is that people are so resilient. People want to keep going. People want to be positive for the most part. One of the women I spoke to and had to tell her about her home, her initial response was, we still have each other. We still have our lives. So many people lost their lives and we still have each other. And the other family was just as grateful. And it just taught me so much about the human condition and about resiliency and how, it can get really bad, guys. And I know it feels like it's really bad right now, but there's always a positive spin on things. There's always a silver lining. That's my waking up alarm. And so in terms of impacting me the most, those were definitely up there.
If I could jump in for a second, I think Laura has hit a point and has demonstrated something that is really important, and that is humanity. You become a journalist, you do your job, you should not lose your humanity. The people you speak to, there is someone's parents, there's someone's kids, someone's siblings. And so there's the stereotypical, crime and how do you feel and the mic in the face. And I think, it's not a pleasant part of the job. There's a way to do it. And I think the way to do it is with humanity. What if this were my mother? What if this were my child? What if this were my sister? And I think you want to treat people after a crime, after a disaster, after a plane crash, after a hurricane, after a fire. Just treat them the way you would want your family to be treated. And it sounds like kindergarten all over again. Treat people the way you want to be treated, but it is critical. Not only do you feel good about yourself, you can make a difference in someone's painful experience and you can help them heal. And frankly, you might develop a friendship or someone who you can go back to on a story again. We talked to Glenn and I and a lot of others after Superstorm Sandy. We met people, we went back to them, we talked to them again. and we try to treat people with humanity. And I think it's really important. You want to get the story. You don't want to lose your humanity.
And that's how you build trust, Pete. You can tell, Pete's a great mentor. You need to listen to when he speaks here. He's had a great impact on the journalism community in New York City. And he talked about trust and respect, Pete. And I think this is why, all these years later, the folks from 9/11, the families like those will come back to myself and to Peter especially, and knowing they can trust him and that he's sensitive and that he cares and that he'll do a good job telling the story. May not be everything they want to hear, maybe something in that story they don't like, but they trust him. And there's a relationship and a friendship there. There's a couple of questions here, guys. I'm going to mention that, Laura, but if you want to answer this first, maybe from let's just make sure I get this. Evelina had the first one here. Do any of the reporters ever deal with politically disgruntled people? That's probably the understatement of the week. We do all the time. Laura, do you want to, we'll go quick through this, maybe a couple seconds, and we'll throw it back to Pete.
Yeah, I think, aren't we all politically disgruntled at this point in some way, shape, or form? Yeah, I see it a lot with protesting. There's been, obviously, we're based in the capital city, right? So there's plenty of protesting. Some of it gets violent, some of it doesn't. Some of it is not in Sacramento, but up more north, where you find more conservative-leaning folks. So we get a nice, there's a lot of different types of people that we're dealing with. And it's not really my job to worry about if they're politically disgruntled or not. My job is to listen to what they have to say. My job is to hear them. That's what I found that people really want right now, is to be heard and to feel like they're not being forgotten. Across the board, that goes for everybody. And I take it seriously that my job as a journalist is to listen, is to hear what they have to say, is to make them feel heard, and make sure that after all of that, I'm still delivering the facts, being honest, being kind in my reporting, and being completely and totally neutral. And that doesn't mean letting everybody hold the microphone and say what they want to say, but it does mean making sure you're telling both sides of the story. And so, of course, I mean, there's so much of that going on right now, but your job as a journalist is to just hear it and listen, and try to be as honest and accurate, not try, be accurate, be as accurate as possible. So I'll leave it at that.
Peter, there's no politically disgruntled people in New York City, right? So
Never.
Nobody's
never.
upset about politics in New York. Never.
Yeah.
And it ties in, Pete, before you start, it ties in. We had a question from Carl. This kind of ties it in, and you can tie it in all together about, how are we presenting to the audience that we're not biased and we're on the story, and that they can believe what we're telling them. I guess you can kind of combine the two.
Look, I think if people don't want to believe, you can't convince them. And so I think what we do is we take authorities, we take experts, doctors, for example, who work in emergency rooms, and we tell them what their best guidance is. And so I'm thinking specifically about masks. People don't want to wear masks. I spoke to this week the head of Northwell Health, which is the largest hospital system in New York. And he basically said, it's not about freedom. Why do you have to stop at a stop sign? Why do you have to stop at a red light? Why can't you drive on the wrong side of the road? And he said, it's just ridiculous. So I think you can't argue with everybody who disagrees with you. You need to ignore your social media if you need to. You need to be prepared to say, this is what the truth is based on what the experts are saying. Be it a scientist, a doctor, not a politician. And I think you just want to be able to say, what in my report is not accurate? So you don't like it for whatever reason. What is inaccurate? And I think this is really a tricky time. It's a tricky time because people don't believe in authority, they don't believe in experts, and you just have to focus on what your job is to try to tell the truth.
Yeah, that's a good answer. And I'm going to come back to you, Laura. You know, this next one too, that I hope I pronounce your name right here, Denaje, about staying creative in the pandemic. And I think it kind of ties into what Pete's saying here, you know, in terms of, you know, when we first started this coverage, unfortunately, my station and Pete's, and probably where Laura is as well, and your outlet, you unfortunately had to talk about the loss of life and how quickly this was spreading. And, but, you know, we couldn't talk about this for months on end. You can't keep going on the radio talking about the loss of life and the suffering and the terrible aspects of this, even though it's important. So we've kind of had to pivot to also get stories like I was talking about before, about getting information about where you can get help with food, you know, medical help, different, you know, for lack of a better term, feel good stories, just in terms of, and there's a lot of that in terms of what Peter was saying with the humanity and everything. But I'll ask you that too, Laura. How do you stay creative? You know, we're human beings too. We're going to have down days. You know, this is overwhelming for a lot of us. A lot of us have had friends or relatives who become sick, and even extreme cases have lost their lives from COVID. So, you know, how do you stay positive and creative?
Before I answer that, I want to talk about a moment I had at the beginning of the pandemic. I had just moved from New York City to California 2 weeks before this pandemic hit. All of my friends, my mentors, including Glenn, my colleagues like Peter, I had left behind in what was now a terrifying time in New York City, and I felt guilty about that. And I remember doing a live shot in Sacramento on grocery store workers and how this pandemic has changed what it means to be a first responder, right? And the anchors led into me with an update on the New York numbers. And they said this is the highest death rate to date. 900 people died today. And I almost broke down on live television, doing a story obviously completely unrelated to New York, but thinking of my friends and my colleagues and my family who were back there. You know, and you have those moments where you're just so overwhelmed. And I think what helps me, and going back to what Peter said, is dealing with the facts, talking to experts, talking to the people who are so much smarter than you are, the doctors and the professors and the teachers, and figuring out what's really going on. But to answer your question about being creative, we have to report on the numbers, right? We need to tell people where to get food. We have to tell people when they have to evacuate. There's information that people need to know, and it's our job as journalists to get it to them. We all know that, and get it to them accurately. But beyond that, and you guys are in college, so let's talk about what you can do as college journalists. Get creative, find the positive story, you know, find the uplifting story, especially now. And that can be anything. Get as specific as you want. Go to the dining hall and find the woman who's been making eggs for students for the last 15 years and who loves her job, and talk to her about how she's flipping pancakes and how much she loves to make food and who her favorite students are, and find those stories that are based in humanity and that just put a smile on everyone's face. The stories that go viral on social media, of course we see protests, of course we see police brutality, we see all of that, but the ones that stick with us are the ones that put a smile on our face and that you can talk about with your friends. Hey, did you see that story? It was so cute. That person was so cool. Find those more specific people. You know, being a journalist is about finding the humanity, like Peter said, and finding your characters, finding people that your audience can relate to. So in college, just go and find anyone who works at the dining hall, find any, maybe a custodian who's been working at the college and who's the biggest Seton Hall fan you could ever imagine. Find a person. Yeah, we're Syracuse people here, Glenn. We're Syracuse people here. And put a smile on people's face, especially right now. These are really hard times. You know, the networks, we're going to cover the numbers. We're going to cover all of that stuff. You know, and when you're done, you're going to have this reel that's so interesting and so different, and you're going to be able to present it to managers, and they're going to be impressed because you took the time to get to know someone. And that's how I would say get creative, get specific, get in there, go into the dining halls, do all of that.
You know, just one thing about creativity, one thing that you guys are probably better at than I am, and that's social media. And you see what people are doing in the community, and you get story ideas, and you reach out to them. And so you know where they're giving away food, you know where they're collecting donations. And so social media is a great way to find these kinds of things.
Pete, I'm going to stay with you here because Orbit TV asked to, you know, we're in a whole different age. You know, you and I have been doing radio a long time. I think one of my skills is being on the street and talking to people. I love it. It's not for everybody. I love doing the man on the street interviews, but this has changed to how we do our business now. You know, Orbit TV is asking, what advice would you give, you know, with these Zoom interviews and phone interviews? It's a different way of telling stories, and you know, there are challenges with technical side, but what would you suggest in terms of, you know, and how's that worked out for you in terms of your work over Zoom or if it's on the phone?
So, you know, being in radio, it's different than TV. I don't need the pictures, I need the audio. And so from that perspective, it's the same thing. It's trying to, this sounds silly, but develop a rapport, for lack of a better word. You want to create a conversation. It's not the same as doing it in person, but, you know, depending upon who you're talking to, if it's not a government official, you want to put somebody at ease. You want to make them feel comfortable. You want to make them share whatever it is you want them to share, where they're comfortable doing that. And that's easier to do in person. So if that means, you know, chatting for a few minutes before you start recording your interview for TV, for example, that's fine. The idea is what you get out of it. It's not a matter of how you go about it. You ask a stupid question to get a good answer. You try to make somebody laugh and feel comfortable to get them to get provide the kind of response that is going to help you tell your story. I don't know if that answers it.
We're up against the time, I think, here to the end, but I'd like to take another minute, at least so we can get Lauren here too. Let's just take a minute or two. I think the session is scheduled now, they're telling me, but if we can hang on here a couple more minutes, let's do this. If you have to go, we understand now. Garrett's asking, as a journalist, when covering a controversial story, how do you report and cover the story in a way it is not disrupted or disputed? I think we kind of touched on that already. But if Laura, if you and Pete want to weigh on it quick, and then I did want to say before you know, I'm going to put you both on the spot. I love connecting with folks after this. I'm going to tell you right now, my email is shuck, SCHUCK @wins.com. If there's anything I can ever do for anybody, because I think it's very rewarding for me to do that. And feel free afterwards or anytime to reach out to me if you're in New York or if you just need some career type advice. So because I get a lot of reward from that. So I didn't want to forget that. About controversial stories, we kind of touched on it, but Laura, you know, in terms of when it's a controversial story and you're going to get a lot of heat from various places, how do you tell that story?
Yeah, I'll keep this quick, and Peter touched on it, but it's about being accurate. Not everyone's going to be happy with what your story is or what you're saying, but as long as it's true and fair and accurate, that's all that matters. Find experts, find people who are smarter than you are. Go to your, I'm in California, so I use, if I need an epidemiologist, I'll go to UCLA, I'll go to UC Berkeley, you know, accredited psychologists if I need one, you know, people who know what they're talking about, people who've been doing what they're doing for a long time. People are going to argue with you anyway, right? So you just make sure you're being accurate, you make sure you're being fair, and you find the experts. You don't need to talk about anything. You need the experts to talk about it. You're the vehicle for what they know. And that takes the pressure off too. I'm not telling people data and statistics, right? They are. They know more than I do. I'm not the smartest person in the room. I think that's important to know as a journalist.
You're one of the nicer ones. I can tell you that. Should I tell them I've known you since you're 7 years old, Laura? Am I embarrassing you?
I was actually gonna
Yikes.
embarrass you and Peter and say that I grew up listening to the both of you. My mom, I think.
No.
I think my mom worked with both of you at one point or another.
Yes.
And they're the best in the game. When Glenn gives you his email, use it. This is about networking. If this is recorded, if you missed his email, rewind and go get it. He'll do anything he can for you. He's one of my mentors, and listening to him and Peter growing up, I learned so much. Whether it was when you were covering 9/11 or anything else. So this is such an awesome thing. I really appreciate all of you guys. And same thing, contact me through social media. It's just at Laura Hafley. I respond on Instagram and Twitter really quickly. That's the best way to get in touch with me. And if I can help you out, I definitely will. So
thanks, Laura. You're the best. We appreciate it. Pete, any final words? And by the way, what are you covering today? You work and how are you going about that today? And be safe out there, please.
So I'm in my car. I was covering actually a hunger event in the Bronx, but I won't waste your time with that. But yes, the story, look, this is the best job in the world. I think so. I think Glenn feels the same way. Laura probably feels the same way. And it's a hard job. You want to be fair. You want to be accurate. You want to tell stories. And in terms of politics, look, I vote, but I'm apolitical. And basically, if somebody asks me, I hate them all the same. And so our job is not to take sides. We take sides. We tell it down the middle. We're fair. We're accurate. And we aim to do that every single day. Simple as that.
Well, thanks, everybody. And, hope you're enjoying the conference. Like I said, stick with CBI because it's a great group, a great leadership group. Thanks to the board of CBI because they do incredible work. Sorry to not see everybody in Baltimore. Hopefully next year we'll be able to see everybody in person, and just please stay safe. And thanks everybody for being involved and for
Glenn, can I just say, I saw some really good questions and I would love to answer them. So if you message me on Twitter and Instagram, I'd love to chat with you. This was a pretty short portion here, but I want to be able to answer your questions. So if I can help you out, I got your back.
And I'm on Twitter if someone wants to reach out. Twitter.